Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to video three of lecture five. And we're going to talk now about another type of market structure that's commonly seen and analyzed in economics, which is a monopolistic market structure. And in this first video, I just want to talk about some of the intuition behind how a monopolistic market structure looks and compare and contrast it to a competitive market. And so, just to define what a monopoly is specifically, a monopoly is a firm that is the sole seller of a product without close substitutes. Okay, so unlike a competitive market where you have a close to an infinite, let's say in the sort of our sort of theoretical context, close to an infinite number of firms selling a homogenous product, right? A monopoly is a firm that is the sole seller, right? An individual seller of a product without any close substitutes. So they really the market looks a lot different in that context. And so, what's the key difference given this definition between a monopolistic market and a competitive market? Well, monopolies have market power, right? And market power in this context means that a monopoly is able to influence market prices through the quantity that they choose to produce. Okay. And so, while a firm in a competitive market is a price taker, they take a prices given for their output. A monopolist is a price setter because the quantity that the monopolist chooses to produce is going to have an impact on the price of the product in a market. And we'll show that graphically and analytically in the next set of videos after this. But I just want to talk quickly about where monopoly may come from, why a monopolistic market structure may arise in our current economy. And there's three sort of primary categories that I've identified. There's other sort of things you can think about, but I think these three will get you thinking about the types of markets that might feature a monopoly. And the first is a monopoly may face cost advantages. And so you can imagine that if a low cost firm profitably sells at a price so low that other potential competitors with higher costs would lose money, then no other firms are going to be able to enter the market. So for some reason, whether it's policy induced or technology induced, which we'll talk about in a second, there may be reasons why a certain firm has a much lower cost of production than all other potential firms that would enter a market. And so this also might include something we call a natural monopoly, which is where one firm can produce the total output of a market at a lower cost than several firms could. So you can think about a natural monopoly as something like an electric utility company or a water municipal district, things that have a lot of infrastructure cost, a big upfront cost to build, that makes a lot more sense for only one firm to do it. So we don't have to build up that massive amount of infrastructure for several firms or a lot of other firms, right? Instead of having one set of power lines going down your street, can you imagine having five sets of power lines, right? Because there's firms competing. Another example is cable companies, which those are being run out of business these days with the advent of online streaming. But a natural monopolies are useful in the sense of we can be cost efficient in how we choose to distribute an output if we only have one firm handling it. And oftentimes these natural monopolies are regulated by the government so that they don't essentially price gouge their consumers. So I know, especially in the case of California, we have a California Public Utility Commission, which basically their job is to make sure that the price of things like electricity and water are set fairly and not in a way that basically is a profit maximizing way for the utility producing those goods. The second way a monopoly can come about is through explicit government creation. And so we don't really observe this in the US because we have antitrust laws and things like that. But in other countries, especially in the case of China here, China maintains a tobacco monopoly that's government induced. The US has, I guess you could technically call the Postal Service a monopoly because the US provides that service and there is no direct competitor that does the exact same thing. But of course, you have these sort of subsidiaries that are essentially doing very similar thing, like FedEx or UPS or other companies like that. So I wouldn't even call the Postal Service a great example of a government-induced monopoly in the U.S. But again, several countries do induce monopolies for certain sectors for a variety of reasons, which maybe could be corruption induced or tax dollar related or export restriction related or things like that. And the final big category that talks about that can be informative in thinking about where monopolies come from are patents or intellectual property rights. And so this is sort of related to government creation, but basically the government by implementing a patent system allows companies to file for trademarks or on intellectual property and generates patents to have sole ownership of the technology, so another firm can't steal it for a certain period of time. And patents are actually important too because a lot of the innovation we see, especially in the pharmaceutical sector or even in the agricultural biotechnology sector, a lot of that stuff takes a lot of money to develop those products. And these firms basically want to ensure that, well, when they're putting a ton of their individual money into development, that another firm can't just step in and use all that development that this firm has put in and basically steal the technology. So patents are important for incentivizing innovation in products that are really technology oriented. Okay, and so in the U.S., these patents do have an expiration time, and so the monopolies are not permanent. But I think it's important to start thinking about how patents uh, can be important in different sectors and why they're used and what kind of incentives they drive. Okay, and so that's just a quick video overviewing some of the characteristics and causes of monopoly creation. In the next videos of this lecture, we're going to talk more about the different profit maximizing condition for monopoly compared to competitive, and see a monopoly market acting graphically. All right, see you then.